The summer of 1989 in Chicago was one of those seasons where the city seemed to come alive in every direction. Tourists flooded the sidewalks, street performers filled the corners with their saxophones and juggling acts, and the sun reflected off Lake Michigan like a sheet of glass. For one family, it was the perfect time to take their 6-year-old child to Navy Pier, the iconic stretch of boardwalk that promised laughter, food, and memories to be captured on film. The parents had been planning the trip for weeks, circling the date on the calendar with excitement. To them, it wasn't just a day out, it was a chance to enjoy a slice of summer before school resumed, a chance to give their little one a memory that would last forever. That morning began like any other happy family outing. The smell of pancakes and syrup filled their kitchen as the child ran back and forth, already too excited to sit still. With a small backpack filled with snacks and a toy the child insisted on bringing along, they piled into the family's car and drove downtown. The radio played hits of the late 80s, the kind of songs that became soundtracks of entire summers, while the parents shared smiles in the front seat, imagining the joy of seeing their child's eyes light up at the sights. As they approached Navy Pier, the child's excitement grew, pressing a small face against the car window to see the rides in the distance. The Ferris wheel loomed like a guardian over the waterfront, spinning lazily against the sky. Vendors lined the entrance, selling balloons, popcorn, and souvenirs, and the air carried that unique mix of fried food, lake water, and sunscreen that defined Chicago summers. The father parked, the mother grabbed the child's hand, and together they stepped into the throng of visitors, unaware of how fragile their happiness really was. The pier was alive with the chaos of joy. Couples strolled hand in hand, street artists painted caricatures for tourists, and the sounds of laughter echoed from the small carnival rides. The child was mesmerized, pointing at everything with wide-eyed wonder. A magician pulled a coin from behind the little one's ear, and the child's squeal of laughter drew smiles from those nearby. The mother bought a balloon, tying the string carefully around her child's tiny wrist. She would later replay that moment in her mind again and again, the red balloon floating above the crowd like a beacon, a symbol she believed she could never lose sight of. They stopped for hot dogs near the boardwalk, sitting together on a bench that overlooked the shimmering waters of Lake Michigan. The father lifted the child onto his lap, playfully stealing a bite of the bun and causing a fit of giggles. The family felt whole, safe, and untouched by anything dark or cruel, yet beneath the surface of that perfect summer day, shadows lingered. Navy Pier, for all its joy and celebration, was crowded, noisy, and overwhelming. The parents, like so many others, had to juggle their own excitement with the constant responsibility of watching a child in a sea of strangers. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the pier grew busier. Lines at the rides stretched longer, voices rose louder, and the tide of people swelled. At times, the mother tightened her grip on her child's hand just to be sure. The father carried the backpack while taking photographs, capturing frozen smiles with his old camera. A picture of the balloon, a picture of the Ferris wheel, a picture of his child holding a snow cone, the kind of photos that years later would become more than just souvenirs. They would become evidence of what was lost. The child wanted to ride the carousel. The painted horses glistened in the sunlight, moving up and down in a rhythm that promised delight. They bought tickets, and the parents stood by as the ride began, waving every time the little one passed by with a grin wide enough to make strangers chuckle. It was a moment of innocence, a moment of pure, unfiltered joy. And in that joy, time seemed to stop, as if the world itself wanted to hold the memory still. But time did not stop. It marched forward, carrying with it the inevitability of what was to come. For now, though, the family was blissfully unaware. They left the carousel, continued along the pier, and the day unfolded like a postcard, sailboats gliding on the water, seagulls circling overhead, the city skyline standing tall behind them. The parents spoke about maybe staying for the fireworks later that evening, debating whether their child could handle being up past bedtime. The little one clutched the balloon, swinging it carelessly with each step, humming to a tune only children seem to know. It was a day filled with all the ingredients of joy: sunshine, laughter, love, and yet beneath it all, an invisible clock was ticking. With every step, every photo, every laugh, they were moving closer to the moment that would fracture their lives forever. Navy Pier was supposed to give them memories to cherish, and it did. But those memories would be stained with fear, grief, and an unanswered question that would haunt them for decades. How could something so innocent, so simple, so full of love, turn into tragedy in a matter of seconds? And so, the stage was set. A summer's day, a loving family, and a child with a red balloon tied to their wrist, walking unknowingly toward the moment that would change everything. It happened so fast that, for years afterward, the parents couldn't quite agree on the exact second their lives split into a before and an after. One moment, they were walking hand in hand down the pier, the late afternoon sun painting the sky with strokes of gold and pink. Their 6-year-old child was skipping just ahead of them, the red balloon bobbing with each bound like a small signal of joy in a sea of strangers. And then, suddenly, that signal was gone. It began with something small. The father had stopped to buy a bottle of water from a nearby vendor. The mother turned for a second to adjust the strap of the child's backpack, which had been slipping off a shoulder. A group of teenagers passed by, laughing loudly, momentarily blocking their view. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, perhaps less. But in that fragile window, the child slipped out of sight. At first, there was no panic. The mother thought perhaps the child had wandered just a few steps ahead. She called the name, expecting the familiar little head to turn and smile mischievously. But there was no answer. No small voice shouting back, no sign of the balloon. The father scanned the crowd, craning his neck to see above the moving bodies. Still nothing. They began to walk faster, calling the child's name now with a tremor in their voices. Maybe he saw something interesting, the father muttered, trying to convince himself more than his wife. Maybe he went to look at the carousel again. But the carousel was empty. The horses spun without the small figure they were looking for. The mother's voice rose, calling out louder now, her tone cracking. "Where is he? Where is he?" The father began to shout too. People turned. Some glanced, then looked away. Others paused, sensing something wasn't right. The pier, moments earlier filled with laughter and music, began to feel like a maze. Each path led to another crowd, another wall of strangers. The red balloon was nowhere to be seen. Within minutes, the mother was running. Her sandals slapped against the wooden planks of the pier as she weaved between strollers, vendors, and tourists. Her husband followed close behind, scanning every child in sight, his mind trying to reject the rising tide of fear. "He has to be here," he said aloud, as if saying it could make it true. "He has to be here." They retraced their steps. The hot dog stand, the magician's corner, the photo booth, all empty, all wrong. It was as if their child had simply vanished into thin air. A woman approached them, sensing their panic. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked. The mother's face was pale, her lips trembling. "Our son," she said. "He's 6 years old. He was right here. He was just right here." By now, the father had reached a security station. His voice was shaking as he explained what had happened. The guards sprang into action. Descriptions were radioed in. Male child, 6 years old, brown hair, blue t-shirt, red balloon tied to wrist, last seen near the central boardwalk. The announcement echoed through walkie-talkies and speakers, bouncing off the walls of the pier like an alarm bell. The atmosphere shifted. Security officers moved through the crowd. Vendors stopped what they were doing and scanned the faces around them. Parents gripped their children's hands a little tighter. Some whispered, "Someone's kid is missing." Others began to help, shouting the child's name alongside the parents joining the search. The mother's tears came in waves now, her breath short and shallow, her voice hoarse from calling. The father ran to the edge of the pier, staring out at the lake, his mind racing with every possibility, each one darker than the last. The water sparkled under the sun, oblivious to his despair. "Please, please, please," he whispered, a mantra against hopelessness. The police arrived within 15 minutes, sirens wailing, lights flashing. The pier, once a carnival of joy, now felt like a lockdown crime scene. Officers questioned the parents, asking for details they could barely remember. What was he wearing? What time did you last see him? Did he talk to anyone? Did you see anyone suspicious? The mother tried to speak, but her words were tangled with sobs. The father answered in short, clipped sentences, his voice flat, his face blank with shock. The pier was evacuated in sections. Visitors were directed to exits. Bags were searched. Security footage from surrounding stores and rides was pulled. Helicopters began circling overhead, their rotors chopping the sky into pieces. The search widened, and yet hour after hour, there was no sign of the boy, no red balloon, no sound of small footsteps, nothing. By evening, the sun had dipped below the skyline, and the bright lights of the city came alive. But for the family, darkness had already settled in. They sat together in a small police station near the pier, holding each other in silence, waiting for news that never came. The mother stared at the floor, clutching the child's backpack like it was a lifeline. The father kept replaying the moment in his head, turning to buy a bottle of water, looking back and seeing nothing, just space, just air. They had come to Navy Pier to make memories, and they did, but not the kind anyone would ever want. That day, that moment, became the scar that would never heal. In the span of a few seconds, everything had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first few hours after a child goes missing are the most critical. Every officer on the scene at Navy Pier knew that. But for the family, time had already lost its meaning. Seconds stretched into eternities, and each tick of the clock was another stab of fear. The sun was beginning to set over Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across the pier as the search for the 6-year-old entered full force. The police presence grew rapidly. Squad cars lined the entrance, their red and blue lights flashing against the fading daylight. Uniformed officers moved quickly through the crowds, shouting descriptions of the child, showing passers-by a photo from the family's wallet. Tourists who had come to enjoy the pier now found themselves pressed against barriers, questioned by officers, and asked to scan their memories. "Did you see a little boy? About this tall? Red balloon tied to his wrist?" Some shook their heads helplessly. Others thought they might have seen him, but couldn't be sure. The sheer size of the crowd made everything a blur. The parents clung to each other as the chaos swirled around them. The mother's face was streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she tried to answer every question. The father's voice was steady, but his eyes were hollow, darting around as if his son might appear at any moment. He refused to sit down, refused to stop searching. He walked the length of the pier over and over, scanning every corner, every shadow, every group of children. With each lap, his hope thinned a little more. Helicopters thundered overhead, their spotlights slicing across the lake and the boardwalk. Boats from the Coast Guard circled near the shoreline, their searchlights sweeping the water. Officers radioed in every potential lead. A boy spotted near the carousel, a balloon floating near the docks, a child fitting the description, boarding a bus. Each lead sparked a rush of adrenaline, and then each one collapsed into disappointment. The carousel child belonged to another family. The balloon was abandoned, tangled in a lamppost. The bus passenger was too old. False hope was worse than no hope at all. Inside the pier's main office, detectives were already combing through grainy security footage. Cameras had caught glimpses of the boy, laughing with his parents, riding the carousel, walking near the boardwalk. But then, at 3:47 p.m., the image blurred. A group of people passed, and when the view cleared, the boy was gone. The footage showed nothing after that. It was like he had vanished into thin air. The city reacted quickly. News stations interrupted programming with breaking reports. 6-year-old child missing from Navy Pier, police searching for possible abduction. Anchors spoke in urgent tones, urging anyone with information to call the hotline number. Within hours, the boy's photo was plastered on television screens across Chicago. By nightfall, thousands of eyes were searching for him, not just the officers, but the entire city. Volunteers began arriving at the pier. Strangers who had never met the family stood shoulder to shoulder with them, passing out flyers with the child's picture, calling his name into the night. Candlelight vigils sprouted spontaneously, with neighbors, church groups, and even complete strangers gathering to pray. The child had become more than just one family's tragedy. He was now a symbol of vulnerability, of the terrifying truth that a joyful day could turn into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. But for all the unity, there was an undercurrent of dread. Investigators knew the longer the search stretched, the less likely the outcome would be good. Chicago in the late 1980s was not a safe place for missing children. Human trafficking rings, predators, and runaways often disappeared into the city without a trace. Detectives worked around the clock, piecing together every shred of evidence. They interviewed vendors, tourists, employees, even children who'd been near the boy. Yet no one had seen who took him. No one noticed a thing. The mother refused to go home. She stayed at the pier through the night, sitting on a bench near the carousel, clutching the child's backpack and whispering prayers. The father paced the boardwalk, his shoes pounding against the wooden planks, his face set in a mask of exhaustion and grief. Every so often he would stop and look out at the water, his reflection broken by the waves, and wonder if he had failed his son in the one moment it mattered most. The search expanded beyond Navy Pier by the second day. Police scoured bus terminals, train stations, and airports. They stopped taxis, searched alleys, and raided abandoned buildings. The boy's picture was on every lamppost, every shop window, every newspaper. His face was impossible to escape. For Chicagoans, the little boy with the red balloon became unforgettable. Still, as hours turned to days, the reality began to sink in. The crowds thinned, the news coverage lessened, and the initial wave of energy slowly gave way to silence. But the family didn't stop. They couldn't. They joined the searchers, plastering more flyers, knocking on doors, talking to anyone who would listen. Every knock, every question, every flyer carried the same desperate plea. Have you seen him? Please, have you seen him? The pier itself changed forever. For those who had been there that day, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy, the sound of the rides, the sparkle of Lake Michigan, all of it became tainted with a single memory. The place that had once been a symbol of joy had turned into a crime scene, haunted by the ghost of a child who should never have disappeared. For the parents, hope flickered and faded in cruel cycles. Each phone call could be the one that brought their son back, or the one that confirmed their worst fear. Each new lead pulled them higher, only to let them crash harder when it failed. And yet, through all the despair, one truth remained. They would never stop searching. Not until they had answers, not until they found their boy. By the third day, the story of the missing 6-year-old was no longer just a tragedy for one family. It had become a wound for an entire city. Chicago, already a place of contrasts where glittering skyscrapers stood alongside struggling neighborhoods, now carried a new, suffocating tension. Every newspaper headline screamed the same nightmare. Child vanishes from Navy Pier. Every television screen showed the boy's innocent face, smiling, as if unaware of the terror his disappearance had unleashed. Morning commuters clutched their papers on the L trains, staring at the photo of the child as the city blurred past their windows. Parents, walking their children to school, held their little ones' hands tighter than usual, scanning every passerby with suspicion. The story had penetrated every household, every diner conversation, every church prayer circle. It wasn't just the family's child anymore. It was everyone's child. The entire city felt as though one of their own had been taken, candlelight vigils began sprouting on corners across Chicago. At Navy Pier, hundreds gathered each evening, holding candles that flickered in the summer breeze, singing hymns and whispering prayers. The pier itself had transformed from a tourist attraction into a shrine of hope and grief. Balloons, stuffed animals, flowers, and handwritten notes began to pile up near the carousel, the last place the child had been seen. Each token was a silent plea. Bring him home. Local businesses printed flyers for free. Grocery stores taped the boy's face on their front windows. Taxi drivers kept stacks of flyers in their cars, ready to hand out to passengers. Children in schools wrote letters to the missing boy, promising they would keep looking until he was found. The city had mobilized itself in a way rarely seen. Yet beneath the unity, fear spread like wildfire. Rumors circulated in hushed tones that a stranger had been seen lingering near the pier, that a suspicious van had been spotted, that someone had witnessed an adult holding a crying child. None of it was confirmed, but the whispers were enough to send waves of paranoia through the city. Parents grew wary of public spaces. Playgrounds were emptier. Trips to parks and fairs were cancelled. Strangers who once exchanged polite nods on sidewalks now eyed one another with suspicion. The police, overwhelmed by the sheer number of tips, struggled to separate fact from hysteria. Phone lines rang constantly, sometimes with credible leads, sometimes with cruel hoaxes. I saw him at the Greyhound station. He's in a motel on the south side. I think I saw him near O'Hare Airport. Each lead was pursued. Each one turned into another dead end. But still, the city clung to hope. The mayor made a public statement, flanked by police officials, urging citizens to remain vigilant. He promised every resource would be used to bring the boy home. News crews captured his words, but even through the polished language of politics, there was an unmistakable heaviness. It wasn't just about one child anymore. It was about the soul of the city itself. If a child could vanish in broad daylight at one of the city's most beloved landmarks, what did that say about safety in Chicago? What did it say about trust, about community, about the thin line between joy and horror? For the family, the sudden wave of public attention was both comforting and unbearable. They were grateful for the support, for the strangers who cried with them, prayed with them, searched with them. But the cameras, the questions, the endless repetition of their nightmare, those things were suffocating. Every interview forced them to relive the moment. Every headline reminded them of what they had lost. And still, they agreed to speak. They stood in front of microphones, holding their son's photo, pleading into the flashing lights of cameras. If you have him, please, please let him go. He's just a child. He's our baby. Please bring him home. The city listened. It wept with them. But it could not give them back what they longed for most. As days turned into weeks, the initial frenzy began to slow. The vigils grew smaller. The headlines moved lower on the page as news stories demanded attention. The city, though shaken, was moving forward, as cities always do. But for the family, time had stopped. The shock remained as sharp as on that first day. Every empty room in their home, every toy left untouched, every silent mealtime reminded them of the gaping hole in their lives. And yet, even as the city's focus shifted, the memory of the boy did not fade. His face remained taped to lampposts, pinned to bulletin boards, tucked into wallets. He had become a ghost who walked the streets of Chicago, a constant reminder of innocence lost and danger unseen. For some, he was a reason to hold their children closer. For others, he was a reason to look at their neighbors with new suspicion. For all, he was proof that even in the brightest places, sunlit piers filled with laughter, darkness could strike without warning. Chicago was a city in shock, yes, but it was also a city in mourning not only for one child, but for the illusion of safety that had been shattered forever. The boy's disappearance had left a scar, one that would never fully heal. And beneath that scar, the unanswered questions lingered, gnawing at everyone who had heard the story. Who had taken him? Where had he gone? And, most terrifying of all, would he ever be found? As weeks stretched into months, the search for the missing 6-year-old shifted from frantic urgency to a grim, grinding investigation. The first days had been filled with the energy of possibility. Every tip, every sighting, every phone call carried a spark of hope. But as the leads dried up and the city's attention turned elsewhere, detectives found themselves digging into deeper, darker waters. What began as a search for a lost child was now unraveling into something far more sinister. Investigators began looking closely at the pier itself, retracing the family's steps over and over. Vendors were interviewed again, this time with sharper questions. Had they noticed anyone watching the child too closely? Anyone lingering without reason? One hot dog seller recalled a man standing near the carousel, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the children riding. Another witness mentioned seeing a woman arguing on a payphone near the balloon vendor around the same time. Details were murky, inconsistent, but a pattern was beginning to emerge, the possibility that the boy had not simply wandered off, but had been taken. Chicago in the late 1980s was a city battling its demons. Drugs, gangs, and organized crime cast long shadows over the streets. But beneath those obvious threats lay something even more chilling: trafficking networks that targeted the most vulnerable. Detectives, combing through missing persons cases, began to notice unsettling similarities. Children vanishing in public places, families reporting brief distractions before realizing their child was gone. Rumors of vans, strangers with cameras, false promises of candy or toys. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to fuel suspicion that what happened at Navy Pier was not an isolated incident. It might have been part of something larger, something calculated. The FBI became involved. Agents joined the investigation, reviewing files, interviewing suspects, and examining possible connections to other missing children in Illinois and neighboring states. One file in particular stood out, a case from Indiana just a year earlier, involving a girl who disappeared at a county fair under eerily similar circumstances. Witnesses there had also reported a balloon, a momentary distraction, and then nothing. That case had never been solved. The parallels were chilling. But uncovering these dark possibilities brought no comfort to the family. Each new revelation only deepened their torment. The mother recoiled at the thought that her son might have been stolen by strangers, torn away not by accident, but by design. The father, once stoic, began to lash out in frustration during police briefings, demanding answers that no one could provide. "You're telling me this could be bigger than just my son? That there are more families like us? Then why don't you stop it? Why can't you find him?" His words echoed the anger of countless parents before him, anger born of helplessness. As the investigation widened, darker rumors began to surface. Anonymous tips suggested links to underground rings operating out of Chicago's South Side. Whispers of children smuggled across state lines, of secret buyers, of lives erased. Most leads went nowhere, but the mere suggestion was enough to twist the knife deeper in the family's hearts. Each night, the mother lay awake, her mind tortured by images of what her son might be enduring. The father drowned himself in work during the day, but at night he sat in silence, staring at the empty chair at the dinner table, the small shoes still neatly lined by the door. For the community, the story took on new layers of horror. What had once been a tragedy at Navy Pier now became part of a larger, more disturbing narrative. Parents whispered to each other in playgrounds, "What if it wasn't random? What if they're out there watching our kids too?" Strangers became suspects. Public spaces once filled with carefree joy now felt tainted with menace. The city's innocence, already fragile, was gone. Detectives kept chasing leads. They raided apartments rumored to house runaways. They interviewed ex-convicts with histories of child-related crimes. They questioned carnival workers, drifters, even pier employees. Each new suspect brought a surge of adrenaline, and each dead end left the family more exhausted, more broken. Every time they tell us they might have found something, the mother said in an interview, her voice trembling. "It's like I let myself breathe for the first time in months. And then, when it turns out to be nothing, it's like losing him all over again." The investigation uncovered other truths as well. Truths that had nothing to do with the boy directly, but painted a damning picture of the world he had vanished into. Corruption in local law enforcement, reports of ignored tips, bureaucratic delays that wasted precious hours in the first days of the search. For the family, these failures were unbearable. They had trusted the system to protect their child, and now they were learning that the system itself was flawed, slow, sometimes indifferent. Yet, in the darkest moments, there were flickers of resilience. The family refused to stop speaking out. They appeared on television, telling their son's story again and again, keeping his face in the public eye. They formed connections with other families of missing children, joining support groups, sharing their pain. They turned their grief into a weapon, determined to force the world to listen, to act. Still, no matter how much was uncovered, no matter how many dark secrets came to light, the most important question remained unanswered. Where was their boy? That question hung over every conversation, every investigation, every sleepless night. And as the years began to creep forward, the truth grew colder, buried under layers of rumors, suspicions, and half-forgotten files. The city had uncovered its secrets, but the greatest secret of all, the fate of the 6-year-old who vanished from Navy Pier, remained locked away, hidden in the shadows, where light had yet to reach. The disappearance of a 6-year-old child at Navy Pier in 1989 was not just a story that belonged to one grieving family. It became part of Chicago's collective memory, etched into the city's soul like a scar that time could not erase. Even as the years rolled forward, the weight of that single summer day hung heavy, lingering in the quiet spaces between conversations, whispered in cautionary tales to children, and remembered every time another missing child's face appeared on the evening news. The case may have grown cold in the eyes of law enforcement, but for the family, the wound never closed. It remained raw, ever present, stitched together only by fragile strands of hope that someday an answer might arrive. For the parents, life became divided into two timelines, the before and the after. Before that fateful day, their memories were filled with family road trips, birthday parties, the sound of tiny feet running down the hallway, and a future imagined with milestones waiting to be celebrated: first day of school, first bicycle ride without training wheels, graduations and weddings. Afterward, all of those dreams hung suspended in midair, unreachable, as if locked behind a door that no key could open. Every empty chair at the dinner table, every holiday where a stocking went unfilled, every birthday that passed without candles being blown out, was a reminder of the life that was taken from them. And yet, they never stopped waiting. Some nights they would leave a light on by the front porch, a beacon in the darkness, a quiet message whispered into the night: "We're still here. Come home." The case itself grew into something larger than the family. It became a symbol. Across Chicago and beyond, parents held their children's hands a little tighter at amusement parks, fairs, and crowded streets. Schools invited safety experts to teach children about stranger danger, and families glued emergency numbers to their refrigerators. The missing child's photograph appeared on flyers, milk cartons, and billboards, ensuring that their face was imprinted in the minds of millions. Strangers who had never met the family found themselves invested in the story, lighting candles at vigils, leaving stuffed animals at makeshift memorials, and writing letters of encouragement that arrived at the family's doorstep in stacks. The city had lost one of its own, and the pain radiated far beyond a single home. As the decades passed, technology transformed the way missing persons cases were handled. Databases improved, DNA testing advanced, and new investigative techniques allowed law enforcement to reopen old files with fresh eyes. Yet even with every new breakthrough, the family's phone never rang with the call they longed for most. The child's name, once spoken daily on news reports, began to fade from headlines. But for the parents, for the siblings who grew older while carrying the shadow of the one who was never found, the story remained at the center of their lives. They fought to keep the memory alive, creating foundations to support other families of missing children, speaking at community events, and turning their private anguish into a public mission. Their pain became fuel, their grief transformed into a kind of purpose. If their child could not be brought home, then perhaps they could help prevent another family from enduring the same nightmare. For those who grew up in Chicago during that time, the story of the vanished 6-year-old remains a haunting echo of innocence lost. Navy Pier itself, now renovated and transformed into one of the city's most popular attractions, carries with it a quiet undercurrent of memory. Parents walking with their children still recall the old newspaper articles, the TV broadcasts, the unanswered questions. They glance around at the crowds with protective eyes, aware of how easily joy can shift into terror. It is as if the child's absence has become a silent guardian, reminding families not to take even a single moment for granted. The legacy of that summer day in 1989 is not just sorrow, though. It is resilience. It is the unshakable power of love that refuses to surrender to time or silence. The missing child became a symbol of every family's worst fear, but also of the hope that burns even when all else fails. Their story continues to live on in conversations, in memorials, and in the quiet strength of those who refuse to forget. Even without closure, the family's fight for awareness has saved lives, spreading knowledge and inspiring reforms in how missing children cases are handled. And so, decades later, the legacy is clear. Though the child vanished from Navy Pier, they never vanished from the hearts of those who loved them. Their presence is felt in every candle lit, in every flyer posted, in every parent's protective grip on their child's hand. A reminder that love endures beyond absence, that memory is stronger than silence, and that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones without an ending. The vanished 6-year-old may not have come home, but their story has become immortal, a testament to the fragility of life, the depth of grief, and the unbreakable thread of hope that even the darkest night cannot extinguish. If this story moved you, don't let it fade into silence. Subscribe to our channel for more gripping true stories that uncover the hidden truths behind everyday moments. Hit the like button if you believe these voices deserve to be heard, and share this video to keep the memory alive. Your engagement helps us bring more powerful stories to light. Stories that inspire, warn, and connect us all. Stay with us, because the next story might just change the way you see the world forever.